You must follow the law. The law says...
Glorious. Is it a lawsuit? Probably. Why not?
Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to Buckle Up. It's the Law with Attorney Larry Forman. Folks, today we are going to be going over something that multiple people have sent me, and they're like, Larry, you gotta do this, Larry, you gotta do this, and I'm sorry, I'm late by like 1 day. I have been sick. Chandler and I have been sick. I'm feeling better. She's still a little bit under the weather, unfortunately, but we're coming together. We're going strong. We're getting healthy, and I am back on the tube. So, in the coming days, there's going to be a lot more content, so stay tuned. We're going to be releasing it in the afternoon Eastern time, or if you're somewhere else on the globe, it's going to be some other time. Anyway, today, Dan Markel's divorce attorney is coming out and talking about the motive why the Adelsons murdered Dan Markel. I have not seen this, so I'm watching this completely blind. So what you're gonna get is a complete, genuine blind reaction. I only watched like the first 15 seconds just to make sure, because I was like, this is someone else's channel, Surviving the Survivor. So shout out to you for the awesome content. I understand they're a journalist, so go subscribe to them. Go check out their channel. I have never heard of them before this video, and they had the divorce attorney on their channel, and the divorce attorney is going to disclose as to what was the motivation, the motive behind Dan Markel's murder. Why did the Adelsons come after him in the first place? Stephen Webster is the divorce attorney. So, folks, without further ado, let's dive right into this. Oh, I can't wait.
Webster, I had the privilege of driving by your office, and I actually put it out on Instagram. You've got a sign out there that says justice for Dan. This for you is so much more than just a trial. For those who don't know you, I know you had some personal things happen in your life that affected you, that made you become inclined to become an attorney, but then also your relationship with Dan. Just speak to that for a minute.
Yeah, so I had a friend who was charged with a crime. I used to pour concrete for a living. I had a friend who was charged with a crime he didn't commit, and I was going back to school at night, and he was a really good kid. And it was just gross what the prosecutors did to him. And it languished for about 2 years. Took my last night class on a Thursday night. They were picking his jury on a Friday morning. Didn't have a cell phone, got off work around 3, called and found out that the judge had dismissed his case. I know now how that played out. They clearly filed a motion to dismiss, and they squeezed him right until the very end to see if he would take a plea, and he wouldn't. Anyway, that night I went to his celebration.
And by the way, this happens more often than you might think. I have had this situation happen myself in my cases with my clients. They're moving forward. The client paid me. The client paid my trial fee. I'm preparing for trial. I get all the evidence. I review all the evidence. I'm ready for trial. I'm ready to go. The night before, a phone call. Mr. Forman, yeah? Can I help you? Yeah, will your client take a lesser charge? Let me talk to him. Happens all the time. Or we're dismissing the case, like happened here.
I mean, his public defenders were younger than me, and they came over to give me a hug, and I said, I'm applying to law school. And he was like, what are you talking about? And I said, if I could do for one person what those people did for you, then it'd be a life worth living. He said, well, good luck. So went to FSU a little bit later in life, and started in 2002 and at FSU Law School. And I can tell your viewers, this is important for me. When I was in law school, by the time I came to law school, all the lawyer jokes had been told 1,000 times. And it was clear to me that law schools were making a very concerted effort to stress professionalism and ethics. And so I worked at the state attorney's office a couple of years, went to work for a white collar criminal defense attorney that Tim has worked with many, many times over the years. Then I went to work for a guy who had kind of a general practice, and he was a brilliant man, and worked with him for quite a few years, but he had no life. I mean, Sundays, he'd call me at 2 a.m. on a Sunday with work questions, and Tim knows who I'm talking about. Fantastic lawyer, brilliant man, but my wife finally gave me an ultimatum. She was like, it's the job or it's the job. And I was like, okay, the job is gone, and started my own firm, and was, like probably most small businesses when they first start, was pretty scared. And a friend of mine called me, it wasn't long after I had my firm going, and said that he had a case for me. And I'd done some pro bono family law stuff. I actually tried a pro bono family law case against Linda Bailey one time. I won. But I didn't, I had no real inclination to do family law, litigation. I know Tim probably would back me up on this. I'm sure John probably would. It's kind of a zero-sum game, and it's, you kind of have to, you can't pull any punches. You have to kind of go for the gusto. And when children are involved, I just didn't like the prospect of kind of fighting like that when children were involved. So I kind of shied away from really taking on any family law cases. And my father-in-law, I worked with my father-in-law, and he was kind enough to let me do his pro bono family law cases when they came in, when the Tallahassee Bar Association sent them to him. He was kind enough to let me do those, which was how I went up against Miss Bailey. But so my friend called me and told me that he had a case that he thought I would kind of be the perfect person for. And I think he knew, me representing a law professor would offer probably a real esteem to my fledgling firm.
Dan Markel.
So, I told him, well, Tor, I don't do family law. And he said, you don't have to worry about it. He's a law professor. He'll teach you everything you need to know. I said, well, that's probably a good thing. So I said, well, I'll meet with him. And so I read all of the pleadings. We were going to have coffee on Tennessee Street. And I decided I was not going to take the case. It seemed to me as if the litigants were drafting the papers more so than the lawyers. I don't want to practice that way.
And by the way, for the record, I don't blame him, because the last thing you want is a backseat litigant for a client, because they're the ones who are having, well, let me put it this way. Their butt is on the line. And if they're also telling you how you're going to proceed and what you're going to do, that's a very, very, very dangerous territory. I have fired clients without hesitation when they start to tell me, Mr. Forman, I need you to file this motion for me. I'm like, listen, bud, you want to practice? Go ahead. Practice on your own case. Don't tell me how to do my job. I know how to do my job. Okay? So I don't blame him. I would have done the exact same thing Steven would have done. Or, excuse me, I would have done the exact same thing Steven did.
The idea of representing a law professor who was accused of contempt and was pointing the finger back in the other direction was not a prospect that was very appealing to me. I quote my fees on how much I'm going to stress over your case. That's literally how I quote fees.
Interesting.
And the idea of seeing a law professor possibly get disbarred and almost certainly face the prospect of losing his job as a law professor, given the stress on ethics that law schools have, and we're hammering all of the students. If all of a sudden their law professors are held in contempt or dinged for submitting fraudulent pleadings, I was like, that's just not something I want to be affiliated with. But I went to meet with him anyway because I told him I would, and I just really liked him. I walked in immediately. He wasn't anything like I thought he was going to be. He was very approachable, down to earth, had a good sense of humor. And we sat there for quite a few hours and probably spent half the time just talking like humans, not about law. And he convinced me that he was on the right side of history and that he was going to be able to establish that Wendi had indeed concealed assets and committed fraud. And then kind of given, for me, what moved me was his main concern was what he believed was the alienation of his children. And when I heard that, and I knew it wasn't about money, that was a big game changer for me too, because going in there just to fight for money with children in the mix and all that, I mean, it's just kind of just unpalatable to me. But if you're fighting because you feel like people on the other side are hurting your children or trying to estrange you from your children, which is what Danny was fighting for. He was fighting for children, not money. And Wendi was the exact opposite. They wanted money, period. I said, you know what? This is a fight I can get behind. And so I decided I was going to work with him. And we had to, it was my strategy that we needed to send requests for admissions to Wendi. He had absolute dead bang proof that she had committed fraud in her financial disclosures.
All right. So there it is. And I heard him talk about it, but I was not certain what he was referring to. Wendi Adelson committed fraud, and Dan had her dead to rights committing fraud in the financial disclosures. What are financial disclosures? First of all, for those of you who don't know anything about divorce law, when two people are married, usually they pool their assets. You know, sometimes you have both names on the mortgage, so the house, you know, you have to decide who keeps the house, or do you sell the house and divide it in half, or whoever contributed however much into the house, they get that. And you know, it's divorces are ugly and nasty and complicated. That's why you should always have a prenup. By the way, for the record, if you have a prenup, you have nothing to worry about. A prenup is going to take care of anything, God forbid, you know, if anything ever happens in the divorce. But that's another story for another day. So financial disclosures are pieces of paper that you have to file in a divorce proceeding. And again, I'm not a divorce attorney. I just know these things from general practice, you know, and talking to divorce attorneys. You basically have to disclose, like, how much are you making? What are your expenses? What are you spending your money on? Like, you know, gas, food, what's your weekly this and that, and yada, yada, yada. And how much are you making? If you lie on those pieces of paper, not only may you not get what you're asking for, the judge is going to carve you out. And you could also be prosecuted, either by the state or even federally, depending on how egregious your violation is. Those are extremely rare, but they're not unheard of, okay? And in this case, it seems like, based on what Stephen is saying, Dan Markel had evidence, he had proof, he had her, as he said it, using his words, dead to rights, that Wendi Adelson lied. And this goes beyond just lying. This is called fraud, because those pieces of paper are filed officially with the court, with the family court where the divorce proceeding is happening. So committing fraud is a big deal. She could lose her requests for things in her paperwork. She could be prosecuted. She could get all sorts of other things happen to her. And she's an attorney. I mean, I know, immigration attorney. Does that even really count? No offense to all immigration attorneys out there. I probably insulted like thousands of you, and I'm sorry. But come on. Especially now, immigration work is probably not the most... Back then, maybe under the Biden administration, Obama... Listen, I'm not going to get into that. But what I'm trying to say is, as an immigration attorney, Wendi should have at least had the brains, the wherewithal, to be like, you know, maybe I shouldn't commit fraud. But she did, and Dan caught her on it. And now, let's keep listening. What happened next? I mean, we can already see the writing on the wall, obviously. We know what happened. And now I'm starting to see another piece of the puzzle, and I'm sure you guys see it too. So she decided, okay, you want to pin a fraud on me? I'm going to make sure that you don't get any custody of the children. We're going to move them to South Florida. That's why she started petitioning, hey, move the children away, get the children away from him, children away, children away. If you don't stop threatening this whole fraud thing, you will never see your kids again. Or if you will, you know, once a month when you come down to Miami, you'll see them 12 times a year or whatever. Disgusting.
I was like, look, we're going to give her a chance to either come clean. Well, I'm going to ask her to admit that you committed fraud. And if she denies it, she'll just be guilty of committing a second act of fraud. And that was kind of my strategy with him. But I told him, I said, look, you know, man, if I file this, even if she zigs or zags, it doesn't really matter at that point, because one way or the other, she's going to be on the hook for fraud. And it could have real dire consequences on her ability to practice law and to work, and on your children. And
in the beginning, for those of you who've been following my saga with Wendi, I was like on the fence. I couldn't figure. I am now 100% convinced that she not only had a part of it and orchestrated this whole thing, she enlisted her mother to be the mastermind. But the reality is Wendi was the one pulling the strings. There is never been a time that I wanted somebody prosecuted so badly as I do Wendi right now. First of all, because she pulled the wool over my eyes, just like she did a lot of other people. And secondly, I mean, her brother's already in prison. Donna just got convicted, spoiler alert, last week. She got convicted, so she's going to spend the rest of her life behind bars. Wendi, you're next.
if we have to do it, we have to do it. But I really feel like I owe it to your children to at least go try to talk to her lawyer. If we can't figure out some way to resolve this short of full on, you know, conflagration. And met with her lawyer. And he's a very, very, very reputable lawyer here in town. Been around a long, long time, tried a bunch of cases. And I'd worked with him on some white collar stuff in the past, so I knew him. And he kind of poo-pooed what I was saying. And I just finally told him, I said, hey, look, Jimmy, you know, my conscience is clear. And Tim's laughing. He knows.
I know Jimmy.
And he's a great lawyer. And Jimmy's kind of got a shtick. He can kind of all shucks you. And like, oh, Steve, oh, man, I don't know. Well, I think you're just going a little bit overboard here, you know, kind of like that or whatever. And I know Jimmy, and that's kind of a routine that he has, but that's not really, he's a very bright man. And when you're kind of in normal mode. And I said, look, my conscience is clear. I did what I came here to do. If we, you know, can find some old school resolution for this, I feel like we owe it to our clients to try. And if we can't, then so be it. That's the only time in my career as a lawyer that I've ever gone to another lawyer's office and tried to broker a deal.
Wow.
For me, it could be perceived as a sign of weakness. And so it's not something I would normally ever entertain. But I felt so strongly about the fact that if this went forward with this litigation, that it was going to be so damaging to Wendi that I just had no choice but to take the risk of looking weak.
The reason, for those of you who may be wondering, like, why is it a sign of weakness? Normally, you want to meet on, like, neutral turf, or better yet, on your own turf when you're litigating a case against the other party. To show up on their turf, it's like, look, I'll give you what you want, da-da-da-da. But that's not the case here. This was an extremely unique scenario where Stephen went to Jimmy's office, opposing counsel, the one representing Wendi, and was like, listen, bud, this is bad. This is beyond bad. I've got you by the balls. Do you understand? Wendi is cooked. I am here out of my own volition because I want to help mitigate this as much as possible. Otherwise, she is cooked with a capital C. Because not only is she going to be losing this divorce proceeding, she might also be prosecuted criminally for fraud. There's going to be a bar complaint, more than likely, that's going to go up to the Bar Association. She may lose her license to practice law. Fraud, the bar does not mess around with. There are lots of things that you can do and get away with for the most part with the bar. They'll give you a slap on the wrist and be like, don't do that again, Mr. Lawyer, Ms. Lawyer. Fraud is not one of those, especially if they've got you dead to rights and they can prove it. So this was an extremely unique position. Wendi was dangling by her Achilles heel over the river Styx. You know what I'm saying? She was at the end of her rope, and there was only one way out. Wow. Oh, I have chills.
So I turned around and was walking out of his office, and I reached out and grabbed his doorknob, and I could still see it in my mind's eye. And he said, Stephen, I know what you're trying to do. And it was like, for the first time, he wasn't all shucks at me. He said, Stephen, I know what you're trying to do, and I appreciate it. And I turned around, looked back at him, and I said, well, Jimmy, you know, if I feel like I owe it to your client to at least give her this chance to see if we can't find common ground. I said, but if I haven't heard from her or you on July 18th, I'm going to file something. And when I file it, I feel like there's going to be no going back. And he said, I understand. And I never heard back from them. And that was on June 24th. And July 18th was a Friday. And so I told Danny, you know, that was our deadline. And told Jimmy that was when I was going to file it. I didn't tell him what I was going to file, but I just told him. And my God. Thursday night, my wife and I and our kids, we were traveling to a baseball tournament in South Haven, Mississippi, up by Memphis. And so I drafted the request for admissions on Thursday, kind of went over them with Dan Thursday night. And the plan was we were going to talk the next morning to finalize them for filing. And I had told Dan that I was convinced that he was still seeing Wendi intermittently. And I told him, I said, that's got to stop. If I find out you're hanging around her, I'm going to be out. I'm going to get off this case, because I had genuine concerns that she might accuse him of like hitting her, kicking her, slapping her.
Right.
Try to get an injunction against him and then use that as the tactical advantage to try to leverage her move with the children back down to Miami. And I know the lawyers here know that they've seen those family law cases that trickle over into criminal court.
Yep. What I was just saying.
And so Friday morning, he called me. I was in the central time zone. We had stopped in Hoover, Alabama. And It was 8 a.m. my time. My children were jumping on the beds. I was like, I can't do this right now, Dan. I'll call you back. Let me get the children fed and get on the road, and I'll call you back at 11 my time. And as we were driving down the highway, and I was just about to call him, my wife decided that she needed to make a stop at a mall. And so I
imagine that.
totally random. So I Googled and I found there was a nice mall about 15 minutes away. And I said, well, actually, that's perfect because you can take the kids inside and I'll get on the phone with Dan and stay in the truck and I'll have privacy and we'll go over these and get them filed because they were ready pretty much to be filed. And, it's kind of going back to the duty to keep your client informed. I wanted to make sure he had a chance to look at them and he was satisfied. So I called him, I believe it was at, it would have been 12:18 Tallahassee time, Eastern. So I guess he had probably been shot about, 25 minutes prior, and maybe 30. He didn't answer, which I thought was really weird because Dan would always answer my calls. We talked a lot. And even if he was with the children, he would still answer my call. He would say, I'm with the boys, I'll call you back, and hang up. So I thought it was weird. And I hadn't heard from him, and it was probably 3:30 or so, Tallahassee time, or 2:33. And I was starting to actually get frustrated because I was starting to think that he was getting cold feet about filing. And I'd already told the lawyer it was going to happen. So I was starting to get a little bit frustrated with Dan, thinking that probably Wendi had called him and kind of beguiled him or whatever, or cajoled him or whatever, manipulated him. And my phone rang, and it was a police officer here in town that I've worked with in the past. I know. And it's not unusual for some of my former clients just to call me on random things. And so I answered and I said, hey, what's going on? And she said, how do you know Dan Markel? And I said, what? And she said, how do you know Dan Markel? And I was like, what in the world is happening right now? And then it dawned on me that she was in violent crimes. And so I concluded that Wendi had accused Dan of battery or something like that. And that's where my mind went. So I went into lawyer mode. And I said, he's my client. I'm going to talk to him right now. And she said, you can't. And I said, I can, which isn't necessarily 100% true. But I said, yes, I can. I represent him right now. I have an active case, active representation. I want to talk to my client right now. And that part was true, but it was a different case. So she doesn't necessarily have to, I don't represent him on that one. Anyway, she responded and she said, you can't because something really bad has happened. And I know it sounds crazy, but at that very moment, I knew they had murdered him. I knew they killed him. And I never once had that crossed my mind before. But just something came over me. And so that was kind of my backstory and how this 11-year-plus-year odyssey started for me.
Wow.
Wow, folks. Now it makes so much sense. We'll see you in prison, Wendi. You need to be prosecuted, and you are next on the chopping block. There is no way you're walking away from this. She was about to lose her entire life, her divorce, her career, her livelihood, because of her doing. Dan didn't do this. Dan was going to call her out on it. She is the one who defrauded the family court. Remember, originally the scheme was to take care of him sometime in June, but they got cold feet or they couldn't work it out or whatever. I think the message was sent like July 18th is the deadline. If you don't do it by then, you're not getting paid or whatever, something like that. I guarantee it. I guarantee that's what happened. And that's why July 18th is such a magical date for Wendi and such an unfortunate date for Danny. Wow. Thank you guys to everyone who has sent me to do this video. I am shaking, guys. I was not expecting this. I was not ready for this. Okay, Let's get it together. Wendy's going down. I think it's all but clear now. Wendy's going down, and we know. See, it used to be that her career would have been over. She decided to trade it for her life. She wants her life to be over. She wants to go to prison. Then prison you shall get, Wendy. And folks, I'm gonna be doing next. Everybody has been asking me to do this, so I'm gonna do this. Turtle Boy versus Lindsay Gaetani. Lindsay apparently filed a answer and counterclaim that's 91 pages long. We're not going to go over all 91 pages. I'm going to give you like the TLDR version. We're going to go over the, in Yiddish, as they say, the tachlis, one of my favorite words. We're going to go through the tachlis of that motion. Apparently, it's wild. I know Melanie Little has done it, Will has done it, and I want to give you my lawyerly perspective on it. So stay tuned. That's coming up next. Don't forget to like this video, comment below, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already for more of these videos. I am going to continue recording videos for you all as promised. Again, sorry for the short break. I just really needed to gain my strength back. But with all that being said, I love every single one of you. Thank you for coming by. I hope you learned something. It's going to take me a minute to come off of this. I'm not kidding. That was intense. So until next time, bye everybody.